3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, to the Fourth Line Podcast with Carl,
Dave,
and Gary.
Not actually, it's me, Carl. Welcome to the final Fourth Line Podcast with you today. As always, Stevie Nick.
I wonder how many people we just made look at their Spotify list to be like, did I click on the right episode?
Hey, you counted us in. We had the music, I think. But that was the very first intro I ever did on the Fourth Line. A little different than it is now.
I remember that episode. I remember listening to that episode with the three of you.
You listened to the very first episode?
I did. I listened to the very first episode, and I knew you guys, I think in the episode you mentioned you were all geographically close to each other. But what I really liked about the grouping of you was the eclectic fandom, because none of you were a fan of the team where you lived.
That's right. None of us were fans of the Flames, which is where we were all in Calgary. We actually did that around. We'll talk about it. We actually got some special guests coming up this show, Nick. But we'll talk about that. Yeah, but we did that around Gary's kitchen table, and we bought 3 microphones and this mixer. And record an episode and had no idea what we were doing. It was a weird combination of over and under prepared.
Well, yeah, picking up the soundboard and all the microphones before you even recorded anything. You're in it.
Yeah, I think, it seems weird now to say this was a different time, but it was a very different time in podcasting than where everything is at now, right? It was so different and diverse, and there isn't the things that we could do now, right? We're sitting here thousands of kilometers apart, seamlessly recording a podcast on Zoom. And you could just use a pretty basic headset mic and get away with it, especially everyone working from home. Everyone's got a microphone at home to hook up to their computer that's of decent quality. So yeah, it was a very different time.
Yeah, it definitely was. And you mentioned it wasn't normal to have a podcast back then. I mean, you in particular, me through a part of it, but this podcast has kind of been on that journey from no podcasts existing to, a pretty familiar format, I think, for people. But you've had spin-offs, you've had you spun it into a website with a, kind of blog writing section. You had guests come in and out. You had interview series. You've done it all, Carl.
It's been a journey, and it's been a lot of fun figuring it out. And we'll touch on all of that throughout today's episode. But we sat down. A little behind the scenes of this. We sat down to figure out what to do. And when do you think we started the whole process of figuring out what to do today? Because I think it's well known that we don't do show prep.
If it's not well known, then good for us. We've known the ending was coming for a while. I would say in January, February, we really started to talk about okay, the finish line is in sight here. What are we going to do? And we talk about it one week, and then we wouldn't talk about it for 3 or 4 weeks. And then we, bring it back up. And probably over the last 3 to 4 weeks, it really started to crystallize what we were going to do.
Yeah, it definitely did. And yeah, you're right. Because September last year, we decided this was our last show. And then we started putting it all together, came up with the Snides tour, put that together. And then, this episode. And I thought, I've never really understood what it's like to make a finale of a TV show or anything like that. But there's a lot of pressure that they have, because I now feel it as someone who has to make a finale of a podcast.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially, it's one thing if your show's been running for 2 or 3 years and you're covering the arc that you want. But after what have you been on the air for now? 8 years?
Yeah, 8 years.
How do you wrap it all up? It's a tough one.
Yeah, I don't think you can. And I also don't think that my video is updating for you, is it? Am I frozen?
It's not. Your video is frozen.
Okay. That's
But
fine.
your audio's working fine.
Welcome to the finale of the podcast, where you just look at me with 2 fingers on my chin
That's right.
for maybe the next hour.
You're looking very thoughtful about what series, TV series, or movie series did you like? Like, what ending did you like?
Well, we started thinking about that, right? Because we're like, what's the easiest way to do this? Rip off somebody else.
Yes.
I think we both immediately when we thought of that, and actually, I want to give a one of many shout outs. There will be many people thanked on today's episode, and we will forget somebody. We're sorry in advance. But former fifth line, we'll call it that today. We're not calling it the blank line because come at us, Columbus. Former fifth line host Mike suggested, he's like, oh, why don't you just like copy a TV show? So we suggested it. I think immediately both of us went Scrubs.
Yeah. Yes, we did. And somewhere in a notebook in my house, there is like some scrapped lyrics for a copy or a cover of the Book of Love, which is what Scrubs went out on.
Which was, you sent me a copy of those lyrics. They were strong. They were very good.
Yeah, they just weren't very finale like, but Scrubs went out on a very high note.
Yeah, but even going back and watching that. So in thinking about it, in that episode, and if you are not a Scrubs fan or watcher or viewer, we're talking season 8 Scrubs. We're not talking season 9 Scrubs.
Correct.
But that episode was so like focused on JD, and he like wanted this big day for himself, right, at the hospital, and no one was giving it to him. And then at the end, he has this montage, and he like flashes back and flashes forward, and it's great. And I think that's what everyone remembers. But I just couldn't think of us making it so much about ourselves and how no one wants to give us what we want on our final day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and like, let's be real, that wouldn't be authentic either.
No, it was a very JD way to end it, but not us. So what other finales, when you think of like a TV show or even like a movie series, what are some that come to mind for you?
Oh, what's a good finale? I always split up my shows between dramas and comedies. For me, like, I hold Breaking Bad as the all-time best. So I love that finale where, Walt finally admits to himself that this is what he wanted all along. And then he admitted it to his family.
Yeah.
And then, he went out in his lab. Like, it was very fitting. So I love that. But I'll tell you a show with the finale that I watched only for the first time this year. And I finished it probably about 6 months ago. And I still think about it like every other day. The Sopranos. Every other.
So what is, I mean, I know.
How it ends?
I know it just like, he like collapses and fades to black. Does it not?
He doesn't even collapse.
No?
It's just you're following his perspective, and then just out of the blue, out of nowhere, it's just cut to black for 10 seconds and then credit rolls.
What does that stand out to you?
Oh, because for so many different reasons. For one, they kind of hinted at the show that when you get whacked, you don't even hear it coming. You don't see it coming. It just goes black. And that's essentially what happened. But as a viewer watching that, my imagination is going crazy. Like, did Tony just get whacked at the dinner table with his family? Like, what is the next scene to that? So I thought that was really cool. But then it also had some, there's so much finality to it in terms of like, that's just what happens. When it ends, you don't get closure. It just ends.
Yeah. And that's I think a famous one because it leaves so many things open-ended, right? Like, you don't know what happens for him. And then I think for myself, I think of those series that don't end as well, right? Yeah. I think we all have those, right? I mean, Scrubs season 9.
Sure.
It's not what you want from the last season of Scrubs.
Yes.
But then I think of like, a comedy show, right? Same thing. You split them up into comedy and drama. Comedy show, How I Met Your Mother, great show for many, many seasons. Awful entire last season. And I'd like to think we didn't end with an awful entire last season. But even the final episode of that show brought closure. And that's what you're really looking for in a finale. In thinking through all these, right? You're looking for closure in some way. Sopranos didn't give it. How I Met Your Mother did, but not in a way that actually like was fulfilling. It didn't give the answer I wanted to that show.
Well, I think part of the reason for that is because it didn't, like, that last season didn't really build up to that ending. Like, granted, I haven't seen it in a long time, but it just felt like the last 5 minutes, they just flipped everything on its head for kind of no reason.
Yes, for sure.
And
which is why the twist ending at the end of this show, when you were actually the one who fired us from the website that shall not be named, is really going to surprise everyone.
Are we still recording? I thought we cut to black like 5 minutes ago.
Who knows? Did Nick get whacked? There's no way to
know. Yeah, How I Met Your Mother was on my list too of questionable endings.
When I think of movie series, that's even tougher now because it's you can have a movie finale, but no movie series is ever actually done anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think of like the initial ones, right? Like, episode 6 of Star Wars, to me, a great finale. Clearly not the finale anymore. It's literally just like a middle point. But the original finale was great, right? It wrapped up those lines, clearly left some things for the future. But are there any movie finales that you really, of like a series that you appreciate?
I agree about the Star Wars thing. I think like emotionally it was a very satisfying ending. I just always come back to like, where were the ghosts in the rest of the series? Why did they only show up at the end?
They were always there. You just didn't notice them. You weren't ready.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Learned that in Obi-Wan. Like, why isn't he showing up yet? Just give us our Liam Neeson appearance. Other movie series, this one obviously was huge in the last little while, but I really did think that the Avengers wrapped up very, very nicely. Like Endgame.
Yeah. Endgame was
however many movies over the course of a decade to all build to that. And then to wrap it up so cleanly, I thought was, you just don't see that. It's very unique.
Yeah, it was. And I think they did a great job. And Marvel continues to knock it out of the park. Even a series that like isn't great is still, compared to other things, is watchable.
Yeah.
And I think that's when the worst case scenario is still watchable, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Now, my all-time favorite trilogy is The Lord of the Rings. Beginning, middle, end. I can't find any faults in it.
Are you an extended cut guy?
Oh yeah.
There is no fault in all. How long is the extended cut?
No, you know what? I will say the theatrical cuts, there's no faults. Like some of the stuff in the extended cut, I'm like, yeah, it's okay that you left this stuff out. That maybe me as a super fan, I would appreciate this, but you made the right call.
Right. For the movie, we know why this wasn't there.
Yes.
That's fair. I like the movies. I like all of them. I didn't even hate The Hobbit as much as some people did. I thought that, again, they took a short book and made it into the opposite of what they did with Lord of the Rings. But I didn't mind that. I thought it was still pretty good. Smaug was a great character.
Yeah. Agreed. It's just like, at most it needed to be 2 movies.
Yeah, I could get behind that. I also want an extended cut or a director's cut rather, where it's just Benedict Cumberbatch running around on the ground as Smaug and none of the CGI on top of it.
Just no visual effects. That would actually be amazing.
I just want that. I want him acting on a green screen with Martin Freeman there. That's all I want.
Amazing. How about The Dark Knight?
Fantastic.
Yay or nay on the ending?
Yay. Yeah.
I agree.
A great series. I think what's tough with that is the legend and like how, because it was Batman Begins, Dark Knight, and then Dark Knight Rises, right?
Yeah.
Dark Knight itself was such a good movie. And then you have like the, oh my goodness, his name's escaping me.
The Joker?
The Joker. Yeah. You have that legacy of what happened with the actor which is the name that's escaping me right now.
Heath Ledger.
There you go. And that kind of, brought a little extra to it. Like I remember going to that movie and being like, I do not know what I'm going to see right now that can like be this level. Right. And it added to it. And there was that payoff of it, led to a really good movie. The most unfortunate way to have a very good dramatic ending.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think those are great. And I mean, so many series just go on for too long. Right.
For sure.
And continue to come back. But these are the kind of things we were thinking about as we're coming up to our finale. So we've got some things planned for you today. We've got a few surprises along the way, some throwbacks. But I want to start by breaking a promise that we made last week, which was, we said last week that it was the last hockey episode that we were going to do. There was some big news this week that happened, and it felt weird not talking a little bit about today.
Yeah. It didn't feel right. Like, this is what our podcast was built on, and we needed to give you a little bit of it today.
Absolutely. So let's spend the next 15 minutes. Robert Hägg, 1 year, $800,000 with the Detroit Red Wings. Nick,
Carl,
what do you think about Robert
What does my
Hägg?
shirt say? What does my shirt say?
Believe in the Yzer plan.
That's it, baby. That's it.
All right. But the actual big news, I mean, even before the trade happened, you said, like, we have to talk about Matthew Tkachuk this week. This is becoming too big of a situation or a scenario for us to avoid it. And then the trade went down, throwing us one final glorious bone. Thank you very much, Flames and Panthers. Matthew Tkachuk, new member of the Florida Panthers.
Yeah. For good, the Flames got quite the haul for him too. But this whole situation escalated so quickly. Hey, like, after the Goudreau thing happened, it just seemed like, boom, Matthew Tkachuk was here. Boom, the Flames filed for team elected arbitration. That meant that they were probably looking at trading him. He's asked for a trade. Like, this all happened within the span of like 5 days, 6 days. And then he was traded.
Not only traded in what I believe is the only sign and trade in NHL history.
That is true. Like, the only technical sign and trade, right?
Right. Because the only way Florida could get the 8th year on this deal was for Calgary to sign the contract, and then he was dealt after that was signed. So,
yeah, and they all worked on it together beforehand, apparently.
Yeah, so 8 years, $9.5 million, going back the other way to Calgary. Jonathan Huberdeau, who just put up a massive season, Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwindt, and a 2025 first-round pick.
That mispronunciation of the name was very on brand for tonight.
Yes, that's a throwback. It's not a throwback. That's just what we do.
That's just what we do here. Quite the haul, hey?
It is, and yet it's not. What was interesting was watching the progression of each fan base. Immediately, the Panthers were like, we gave up that much for Matthew Tkachuk. And by the time you woke up Saturday morning, the Flames fan base, on the other hand, realized none of these guys are protected. I mean, Cole Schwindt, probably not going to be an NHLer. But Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar both have expiring contracts after this year. So it could be a 1-year thing, hence the first round pick included in that. Not conditional on either of them staying, but still just an added protection. But it was interesting seeing the fan bases switch from Panthers fans angry to Flames fans angry, all within 12 hours.
I remember first seeing it and reading the discourse, and like, people were flipping out. They're like, Florida way overpaid here. Way overpaid. They should not be giving that much up for Matthew Tkachuk. And my first thought was like, I bet you Huberdeau is a UFA at the end of this year. And sure enough, the next tweet I saw, I was like, yeah, he's a UFA at the end of it. They must have had some sort of like a lack of conversation there. They must have thought that we're not going to be able to keep him.
That's what it sounded like. Yeah. That he wasn't able to, because so let's put everything else, contracts aside. Let's assume they're on equal contracts, equal length. Everything's the same. Who would you rather, Jonathan Huberdeau or Matthew Tkachuk?
For the next 8 years?
Yeah, let's assume
starting now, Matthew Tkachuk.
Is it close?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's close.
Yes, it is. But that's why I asked about 8 years, because Tkachuk's younger. He's got more in him.
That's true, right? Huberdeau's 29 already. Tkachuk's 24, so 5 years older, right? That 8-year deal for Huberdeau is going to take him till he's significantly on the decline. But if the Flames manage to re-sign Huberdeau, which it sounds, I mean, they've already started that conversation. They're already on that way. This is a win for them. This is absolutely makes up for the loss of Tkachuk. It doesn't make up for the loss of Gaudreau, but they got in a great winger in Huberdeau, and they brought in a good defenseman in Mackenzie Weegar.
Yeah. And they've completely changed the narrative around their team too. Because last week it was all Flames stripping it down, rebuilding from first in the division to having to be in the draft lottery. And now I think they're going to be competing for a playoff spot again.
Yeah, I think so as well, for sure. And they have that flexibility now. Now I know like they'd rather not have the flexibility and have Johnny Gaudreau, but they're open to other things, right? Like,
yeah.
So it kind of does that. Do you buy into this narrative with both Gaudreau and Tkachuk leaving that it's an anti-Canadian team exodus from these American players wanting to go play in the States?
So not fully, but I did read Gaudreau's piece in the Players Tribune, and I get where he's coming from in terms of starting a family and wanting to be closer to his family. And, you know, maybe like distance or time in the air is not much of a, you know, difference between Calgary and Columbus. But the last 2 years, and it's still ongoing, crossing borders has not been easy.
No, is not.
It's not. So like, I get it. When your entire family is down there in the US, it's much easier to move between states than it is to have to deal with the border. No matter how rich you are, like they're brutal.
Yeah. And I get that. And I think it'll start to change. I don't think that it is. I mean, there's plenty of Canadian players that don't pick to come to Canada. Like we don't see a mass exodus of Canadian players leaving the States. It's the same rules going both ways, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a little overblown. But I could see it. I mean, there's definitely, you know, some players that prefer the anonymity of I can go make $9.5 million in Florida and no one cares who I am. I go, I play hockey, I leave. Whereas you play in Calgary, there's that pressure, right? No, everyone wants to know how you're playing. You have a bad game, they're on you about it. The media is tougher. So I get it, right? I absolutely do.
Plus there's no beaches.
There's no beaches. And I think Roberto Luongo probably has made the ultimate case for like why you should leave Vancouver and go to Florida at the end of your career. The other big news this week, kind of one that has been on the radar in various degrees for the last couple months, and it just keeps coming up. And this is the whole controversy around Hockey Canada. And one thing that is unfortunate that has become a trend on our show the last number of years is talking about controversies in the world of hockey, whether it be, racism, whether it be the Chicago Blackhawks, whether it now be Hockey Canada and the issues around the 2003 and 2018 World Junior teams. It's unfortunate that this is something we don't want to have to talk about on our last episode, but it feels like we're intentionally dodging it if we don't.
Yeah, it's big news. Like it's a scandal. Let's call it what it is. It's I don't know, man. It's bad. It's not good. And I think what makes me the most sad about the whole thing is how little kind of surprise I feel. Like I know the type. And it made me feel guilty, actually, because I was like, yeah, I know that these guys are like that. And you just kind of, it's just the way it is. And you kind of accept it. And then you start hearing about the details. And when you hear the details, like, and it kind of comes to life, it makes me sick to my stomach, really.
Well, I mean, we've heard allusions to some of these things before, not to specific details and not to the fact of, inappropriateness. I mean, certainly not the most wholesome of actions being taken, but the fact that there are now specifics on the fact that it is inappropriate, some of these actions that are taken. I think, like you said, like it's not surprising, and it's sucks that we sit here and we talk about some of these things that have happened, and kind of with all of it, I am glad that we're at a place that these things are coming out, and that the people that are doing this cannot use the power, the prestige, the status that they have to get away with these things like they once did, because they shouldn't.
No, they absolutely shouldn't. And they need to be, I believe they need to be made examples of, because young kids playing the game now, growing up, they need to know, like, this is not okay. You can't do this. You can't act like this.
No.
It doesn't matter how old you are, or how immature you are, or how much peer pressure you feel. Like, these things are not okay.
I'm with you. Yeah. I think it's a big thing that needs to be dealt with. And I'm glad that finally Hockey Canada is dealing with it. However, their hand was forced. The fact that they knew about these things and didn't puts them in the exact same boat for me as the Blackhawks did earlier this year, right? Where we sat here and said, clean house, get rid of them. They're dead to me.
Yeah.
And, I think, there's a World Junior tournament happening this summer in Canada that has lost sponsorship, has lost things. Do I want to sit here? I mean, summer hockey is going to be weird anyways, but do I want to sit here and celebrate that? No chance. No chance I want to do that.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I have a Hockey Canada t-shirt that has now been at the front of my drawer. This is how I make sure I wear all my t-shirts. I take the one at the front, but this one's now been at the front of my drawer for 2 weeks, because every time I look at it, I'm like, I don't want to put that branding on and go walk around in the world right now. It just feels slimy.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that is disappointing, obviously both of these are involving the men's World Junior teams. It is unfortunate. I know the women's national team put out a statement today talking about the fact that this is going to be impacting their funding. I think with a time where we're seeing, the not the PWHA, but the PWF has a new team happening in Montreal. I think in a time where women's hockey is continuing to grow, it's unfortunate that they are going to be losing funding and losing some of that improvement that they've been seeing over the last number of years. And I hope that Hockey Canada finds a way to not let them suffer because of the actions of a different group.
Yeah. I hope so too. It's funny. I hadn't even really thought about that till I saw their statement today. And then it dawned on me, like, how much they rely on that men's program to bring in the sponsorship dollars. And then it gets spread out through all of Hockey Canada. So Absolutely. When all these big sponsors and government funding stops, that's the women's game that's suffering. That's the young kids game that's suffering. So hopefully they find a way to work around that. Like, maybe sponsors can be a little more specific of where they want their sponsorship dollars to be spent within the program, or maybe they do it outside of Hockey Canada and work with players directly. I don't know, but that is, hopefully they can figure that out and work around that.
Yeah. Cause I think, like you said, young kids, people are not involved with it. I know that, the World Juniors right now, hopefully didn't participate in that, but certainly we don't want to hinder those that are now negatively being impacted as well. But
yeah,
that now is our actual final hockey news segment.
That wraps it up. Now we got fun stuff. I mean, that was fun. Well, half of that was fun. The other half, not so much.
No. Nick, special guests at the door for long time listeners of the show. We have two very special guests with us, the original hosts of the Fourth Line podcast, back on the show. I think this is the first time since Dave left that both Dave and Gary are back on the show. Welcome, gentlemen.
Nice to be here.
Also, mutual feelings.
So you guys sound so excited to be back. Now I want to ask, because I listened in those early days, so I'm trying to remember. We have an Avs fan in Carl, a Habs fan in Dave.
No.
Oh, and Gary.
Yeah, that's right.
And a Flames fan in Dave.
No, a Leafs fan. I was always the painful one. Yeah.
Yeah, that checks out. The Leafs fans are always the most painful.
So welcome to the show. So we actually, listeners have already heard this today, but because we started our show with the very first episode. So let's start there, because it's been 8 years. First episode came out November 2nd, 2014 was when we first came out with our first one. But I want, let's just take a quick listen back to like the first 30 seconds of our first show. Welcome everyone to the Fourth Line Podcast with Carl,
Dave,
and Gary.
This is episode 1. We're just going to try to sort out what we're doing here. Hope you enjoy the show.
I'm enjoying it.
How's my radio voice?
You sound great.
Do I need to golden that thing up?
You could go a tone lower.
I feel like if I give myself a false voice, I'm going to forget it from week to week. And then every week will be like, we have a guest on the show.
We could have a guest every week.
But I'm like a permanent guest. Like, who's this new guy they keep bringing in?
You know, my concern about the guests is that when we invite people to be on our show, we're going to be like, come be on our show, but can you bring your own mic? Because we only have 3.
We only have 3. This is a real low-budget show here.
So if you want to be on our show, you have to have a mic. But you can come because we got a 4 spot in our outputs.
Yeah. And a spare chair at this table. There you go. So after all this time, good news, Nick brought his own mic today. And so he's able to be on the show. But this is still, and actually right here, you can still see, this is still the original mic that we used to record this. And I believe I'm actually using the Dave mic. This is the Dave. I think Joel got the Gary at one point, and mine is still sitting there completely unused. So
Yeah, I mean that takes you back. I think it's funny actually to think about how you're recording this show now, using Zoom and all the things, and we were crowded around it. I remember we agonized. Maybe that's the wrong word, but we about the equipment, like getting I don't even know what those things are called, but the thing that the mic's plugged into, and the mics. I remember we went shopping. It was quite the trip. And we sat around a table and stared at each other in the face and did it. And how things have changed.
I can tell you something that hasn't changed. I am as equally nervous for this current podcast as I was 8 years ago.
And Carl's still in charge. I think that's something that we always knew, that the success the success of the podcast would be because of Carl, and the failure of the podcast would be because of one of us. That was basically what we established from day one.
I would tell myself often, please don't cancel our podcast today, in my head. Don't say something. And I would sometimes sabotage episodes, not on purpose, but deliberately knowing that I was going to introduce like a cashy bar or like a random football fact, so that I didn't say something completely inappropriate and get us taken off the air.
Now we just edit those things out.
Actually, if I think back to our very first episode, I'm fairly certain Gary said something that we had to edit out the very first one.
Yeah, we were a one-take podcast, weren't we?
Nothing has changed. 8 years later, I still will. Yeah, we don't edit. We're a one-take show.
Yeah. Pretty much. But it's pretty impressive that you were in it to win it from day one. Like you went and bought the mixing boards and the mics. Like there was no trial period. It's just, we're doing this.
Yeah, I think I don't remember why we decided to do it. But like Carl, Gary, and I have spirited conversations about any topic still to this day. And I think at one point we thought, well, why not record those spirited conversations? We were younger for sure, and
that is what happens when 8 years pass.
That reminds me of my hottest take when I said they'll either win or they won't. Those are classic Dave takes. But yeah, we were young and we cared a lot more about some of the things we used to talk about. I care much less about the status of the Leafs or what they do or don't do. And actually, I would say that Gary might be a better Leaf fan than me in current climate, given that he's usually the one calling me saying, oh no, look, it's going to be okay. They're going to be okay. Whereas back in the day, we were that classic Montreal-Toronto rivalry, and it just doesn't exist anymore.
I can remember how the podcast started. It was shortly after my wedding, because the first podcast episode was recorded at my house, I believe. So I had gotten married, and at that point, Dave and I had been friends for a long time, and Carl had come into the fold sort of previously to that. But I definitely remember like you guys being in the wedding party and really coming together sort of as just in general, having fun, drinking. And then Dave approached me one day about starting a podcast. And I said, what do you think? We should bring in a third. We should get Carl. And like, obviously the support was there immediately. And from there, it definitely turned into Dave and I knowing that we would not survive a full podcast season without the organized brain of our Colorado fan. But it definitely was how it all started, definitely that summer, and definitely after sort of a really good fun spring.
Was it always going to be hockey, or were there other spirited topics that...
So I used to work a job, and hopefully Ray's not listening. He didn't listen then, so he shouldn't listen now. But I used to sit in my work van, and Dave and I would discuss the back and forth of the current Phil Kessel contract, the viability of Dion Phaneuf as a longtime leader, and $7 million. And I would completely ignore work altogether and just sit in my van on the phone discussing hockey for, some days 10:30, and I started at 11. So the decision to sit around and banter hockey had been there for a while. And I don't know what Dave did for work, but I'll tell you what, it didn't start before 11 o'clock.
Well, and I think, thinking back to kind of how it all started, the first time that we talked about it, I think, Gary, you and I talked on the way to one of our first bow hunting trips, because that was probably the same year we started that. And
you were in from
yeah. And so started with that. And then we all went to Mexico and then came back, and weeks later, put the plan together in Mexico, hatched it, and then started it when we came back.
And took pictures of our chins.
Right. So I've got the audio or the Spotify up right now, and it has our first ever graphic, which is 3 pictures of our chins looking tough. Gary's got the meanest mug of them all right in the middle. I have the beginnings of a mustache. It is an embarrassment that I even put that up there. And Dave's got the same facial hair he has today with a little less salt in that pepper. And we spelt out the word fourth. That's the thing that stands out to me the most, other than the terrible pictures of our chins. It's spelt out fourth, a decision that I don't know if we ever used it other than that one picture.
No, that was, I made that on my phone for sure. I think using Instagram layouts or something, or whatever version of that. And so that's probably just me spelling things out, because that's what I do. That definitely wasn't discussed or decided, but we definitely came out of the gates with thinking we were going to take over sports media. And and we had a good time doing it. But it's as you know, it's a lot of work, and takes a lot of time. So Gary and I fizzled out much quicker than Carl. I mean, it's so impressive. We had talked about it often because we do still remain quite close. That I can't believe that it's still happening and that you've kept it going this long. So pretty impressive.
Do you guys have any? I mean, Dave, you didn't even last a full season. You left like you just left me and Gary hanging for the last like playoffs. Like a classic Leafs fan, you were out come playoff time. Do you do you guys have any like standout moments or memories from that first season together?
The one moment for me, and it's the times you make someone upset is always the times that stand out the most. But the Patrick Sharp incident, where I had received a Facebook hot tip about Patrick Sharp going to the Leafs, and Carl adamantly before the podcast, we are not discussing random tips. And I brought it up. I mean, I thought we had something to go off of there. I brought it up and we discussed it, and you were not happy. And I mean, ultimately, that may have been the spark that led to our ultimate demise, because it did cause a small rift. But that was, I mean, that episode in Dave's kitchen where we were just giggling and laughing and speculating, and it was nonsense, but it was a lot of fun.
And Carl got mad. You were really mad, Carl?
I do not. I mean, we've done what? I think this is 390. If I remembered every moment from every episode, it'd be a lot. Do not recall that in the slightest.
I think mad's probably maybe an overstatement, but like what ends up happening, or what happened for us, was that Gary and I were just like, oh yeah, we'll just do this, or we'll talk about that. And Carl would be like, we have to have a plan. You have to like we have to have at least some sort of idea of what we're going to talk about. And we're like, I know, we'll be fine. We'll just riff. And I think you always from day one took it far more seriously than we did. You saw a path forward for like getting partnerships and all this stuff. And I honestly just thought we were going to record conversations that Gary and I had in his work van. Like that was it. And so I think over time you've from what I've observed, you've dabbled in all of the seriousness of podcasting, which there's lots you can get into. It's a legitimate business if you want it to be. And you've definitely mellowed and gone back to just, talking about the sport that you know and love. But I'm assuming maybe Nick can tell us more about whether you've mellowed, but that there was some fun moments. I don't know that I have, honestly, like the reason. Part of my motivation for leaving was that I started to get concerned about recording myself fighting and arguing about dumb stuff on the internet. Like, you're starting a family and you're thinking about your career. And I was like, at times you're like almost fabricating your outrage on topics or whatever. And I was like, this doesn't fit for what I'm trying to become in life. And so I did just literally decide one day I was done and peace. And in hindsight, was that the fairest thing to my partners? No, but I did it. I don't even remember how we handled it, to be honest. I don't know what you guys said on the show or how you explained it, but I just decided I was over it. And
we killed you off. Everyone is finding out right now that you're still alive.
Yeah, still a thing. But man, like we did have some pretty funny shows, laughing and talking about random stuff for sure.
Do you remember the episode in Carl's basement where it was like 10 degrees and we were freezing?
I remember that one.
Yeah, I do remember that. I remember that we rotated houses. That's something that we did. It was like 1 week we like had this like briefcase of all the equipment, and 1 week it was at my house, the next week at Gary's, and then at Carl's, and we'd travel around, and we didn't live close. Like there was some travel involved for those setups.
Couldn't do that now with the gas prices.
No.
We would definitely need sponsorship to pull that off. But I mean, even back then, you mentioned that like I took it more seriously. And I think as you guys left, I know we've talked about this, that like I felt like I maybe pushed us in a direction that you guys clearly didn't want to. But I mean, you left, like you both left for different reasons, right? You were having a family, Gary. You were starting, you were having kids, and Dave, you mentioned
I was a head case.
So
yeah. That's fair. You can say it now. We're so far removed from that, it doesn't matter. But I was going through some transition. Yeah, that's fine.
And so I think, like, out of what you guys created, I mean, it would not be what it is today, even though, like, you know, it started with just that small amount. I don't think it would be what it is today without what you guys brought that very first season that started it. Because even listening back, I mean, I listened to about the first 10, 15 minutes of that episode, and there's still things that, like, from that I still see in today's show that we've done and we do and I do, right? And that came out of, like, me finding my voice and you guys finding your podcast voice, and the anger, whether it be real or fake, along the way of various times. I think, like, all of that
all real.
It was, I mean, every time I've been upset on the show, it's all been real. I've never faked it once.
And Gary still has his sultry radio voice, which we knew from day one was going to be a hit. Do you talk about, so after I left, or maybe it was after Gary and I both left, you went into your first big partnership. Do you talk about that partnership at all on the show anymore? With that unnamed website?
The website that shall not be named. I mean, we talk about it a lot. We never mention who they are, but
okay.
It'll come up in this for sure. I mean,
for sure.
When we talk about hopefully we haven't
the wrestling episode.
We haven't nailed it down yet, but I mean, whether Joel is on or not, the Royal Rumble episode is being discussed as a key pivotal moment in the history of this show. But I mean, Nick, you started listening back when we 3 did it. What was it? What do you remember of the Carl, Dave, and Gary era?
I just remember it feeling like 3 regular guys talking about hockey. And it was kind of like podcasts weren't as big as they are now. So it was kind of refreshing than, you know, from having to just watch the TV personalities or listen to Sportsnet radio. That's what I remember. And I listened to most of the first season, and then I fell off, and then I started listening again, and there was only 2 of you. I was like, what the heck happened to the other guy? And I listened to a few, and then I jumped off, and then there was someone else again. And that's when I started really listening more week to week. But yeah, it just felt like I always come back, Carl, to the description of the podcast on whatever podcasting apps is just grinding out our opinions on hockey, regular guys grinding out our opinions on hockey. And that's what drew me to the show. And that's always what I feel like you've done with whoever is the other half of the hosting team.
Yeah, the fourth line concept still, I think, is a fantastic concept. I know it's been other people, but like just that idea of the grinders in the world of sports media, you know, they don't get a lot of love, or, you know, the sport is evolving for sure, but I think it was genius. And Joel probably was a far better co-host than Gary or I at all. He's got way more personality. Like I think, you know, it's cool that it's impressive to me that you've kept it going through like multiple co-hosts, and every time those people bring different personalities and interests, and so I think you've earned your retirement and whatever that's going to look like. But
well, I mean, right now it's going to look like enjoying the rest of the summer, which is going to be great. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for coming on, but more so, I mean, thanks for helping create the show. It would not have happened for many people, right? Most people listening right now never listened back when it was just the 3 of us. I know that there are some who have. There are some who listened from the very beginning, which is wild to me that anyone listened to that first episode. I don't know how anyone ever found us, but they did, and they still did, and they still do. And I appreciate that.
We were top 10 on iTunes.
There was a day that I think we peaked at number 5, and I found that screenshot recently, and it's like you see like Bob McKenzie and Dangle and us all up there, and I was like, well, don't know how that happened, but cool. Yeah. So thanks for coming on. Thank you for bringing us back down memory lane and joining us for one last time on the show.
Thank you. Good luck.
See ya.
That was fun. That was fun for me, especially as a early days fan. to get to talk to you and Dave and Gary together. It was just fun hearing the origin story of the podcast all those years ago, where your heads were at, how it all came together, and then how it evolved early on.
Yeah, it was, I think, I mean, any show, right? I think like many things, I think the average podcast lasts less than a year. I don't know the actual stats for it. I think I'm way past the like deep dive into podcasts, how podcasts operate, and how we just show up and make the show.
Yeah.
But like there's that stat that I think like 75% of podcasts make it less than 10 episodes. And it felt like that a little bit then. And I think you can hear that in the way that we talked about it, right? That we looked at each of those different parts, and each of us had a different perspective in a different way. And we were figuring out what we wanted, how we did it as a show. And it just kind of evolved as we went. And, you know, like it did when you came on and Joel was planning to leave, and like it did then, it, you know, continues to be the like, well, do we wrap up the show or do we not? And as we sit here now, actually wrapping up the show, it's a fun way to look back on it.
Yeah, totally. And we do have one more guest. Oh, they're here.
It is the always wonderful Joel.
Welcome back, Joel.
What's going on, boys? It's been a while.
It's nice. It doesn't feel like you ever left because you keep popping back up every 80 episodes or so.
Yeah. I hope only in good ways.
Yes.
So what's been keeping you wonderful these last 80 episodes or so?
Oh, I don't even know. Carla and I are golfing. That's what we were doing this summer. That's where we spend our time. We're trying to figure out how to golf again. We're like old men.
One of us is way more successful at it than others, though.
Oh,
My
can
son.
I guess who?
Is it bad that my son is 6 and he's already golfing better than I probably was when I was like 20? So
some would argue he's better at golf than I am presently.
No, don't sell yourself short, Carl.
You did tell me what you played a very special course. Just one hole of it was unique recently.
Oh yeah. So longest golf hole in Canada. It was like 900 yards. It was was it a par 7? I think it was a par 7. I took a picture to remember it. It was like ridiculously long. It took me 6 shots to get to the green, I'm pretty sure. Something like that. I parred it though. No, so maybe only 5. I parred it. I was very happy with myself.
It's pretty good.
It is good.
So,
but aside from golf, I mean, this summer also brings great barbecue. And it brings the end of a show that you were a huge part of for most of it, from season 2 through 6. I want to say, Joel, you were a part of the show. And kind of as we're at our last episode, what stands out to you as kind of some of what you remember about being on the show?
Oh man, when you asked me to come, I was trying to think of all the different things that happened, and I think some of the funnest things about it was some of the like just random guests that we had. Do you remember Mark Simon?
Yeah, I remember Mark Simon asking us genuine questions about hockey analytics. I'm like, dude, this is your job. Like, this is what you do.
Yeah. So I think that's looking back at it, just like some of just the weird conversations and opportunities and things that just have happened because of it. Nick entering our lives, ripping on Boston as much as possible. There's just so many things that I was thinking about. I was like, it's just hilarious about some of those things. I remember one of my favorite moments was when I asked Jen Scrivens if her and her husband settled arguments over a shootout. That was one of my favorite moments in life.
She pleaded the fifth pretty quickly on that one.
Yeah. I don't know if she appreciated that question.
Well, she hasn't been back on since, so.
Checks out then.
I think the guest that we had, what I appreciated was that I think behind the scenes, right? There's a little bit. I was going to say a lot. There's a little bit that goes on behind the scenes with the show, but the behind the scenes of what you brought of like ideas and just like segments. I'd say most of the segments that happened during your time were you, right? I think like the Rant Shack was you. The Elimination Station was you.
Isn't there a counseling coach?
There's
Joel's counseling coach. And those were all things that like we'd spitball and you would take it to like kind of that next level. I always appreciated that you were able to come up with some of those things. Even the things that got us some of our most fun sections, right? Like the Royal Rumble was your idea.
I was wondering if that was going to come up. That was almost the end. You guys, see, I was going to say, I was like, this is impressive, you guys, that you lasted this long. Because the Royal Rumble was supposed to end it all. That was it.
Now, was that segment planned before the show? Or was that off the cuff while you were recording?
No, that was the energy that we put behind the scenes at the time.
Gotcha.
It would be a great idea if we spend way too long talking about who could beat each other up in the NHL.
And I still stand by that being a fantastic idea. I mean, I look at the kind of summer content that more legitimate websites put out. Like I saw The Athletic had an article this week on the best mascots and the best logos of each team, just ranking them.
More legitimate.
I look what we're comparing it against. I'd say far more legitimate than websites that fired us. And so I fully, even more so, I stand by our decision to do that then and now.
That's an all-time episode. Top
all-time episode. And also took the show even further than it would have gone. Like, seriously, like, because then it just forced us to rethink what we were doing, what we wanted to do. And that's the one, and like, you guys have carried this on, but I always remember we always just talked about, we only do what we want to do, not what anyone felt like we should do. And so that's why the Royal Rumble. I was told that I could air some grievances. Can I say the thing that I least like about the show?
Absolutely.
So, not that we did. I hated the name High Sticking. I hate it. It was and I'm pretty sure Carl and I argued about it back and forth, but at the time there was just not a better name.
And that's the name we had.
That's the name, and it's gone forever.
To this day, it's still there. I mean, now it's done, but it was still there.
That was the only thing I had to say it. I've been holding that in for years.
Well, Matt is a proud namer of that segment, so he'll be disappointed to hear that. But you can feel how you want.
Care. Forget it. It doesn't matter about that guy. Forget that guy. Just kidding. I love you, Matt.
What I appreciate, you mentioned like the fact of like we're going to do what we want to do to have fun, but also one thing that you were a big supporter of, just try it, and if it doesn't work, then like who cares? That we would, if we wanted to go to a website and like work with them, and if it doesn't work, then we just like go find a better place to work, and that led us into some really great spots, right? Like when we ended up at the Alberta Podcast Network and the great folks over there, and then switching, it was all just like because you were like, I don't try it, and if it doesn't work, then we'll go find something else, and if it's not good for us, then we'll leave. We don't like owe anything to anyone, and I think that led us to some unique opportunities and guests, right? Like, I don't know, just ask them, what's the worst that happens? I think that's the biggest advice for anyone making a podcast. Like, if you want to have a guest, just ask them. They'll probably say yes.
Well, I think we just had fun. that was like, we just wanted to have fun. Like you say, I think that was half the idea is just like, hey, like, let's just, what are we going to do that's going to have fun? And then who are the people that we can bring into the mix? And then that's what brought Nick in, right? Like, just who are people that we enjoy talking about hockey, about anything, and just like, let's just have fun, try it. Who cares? We like the community that was built through it was amazing, but it was still like, at the end of the day, it was still, that was like bonus. It was still just more about, let's just have some fun, chat about whatever, goof around, do what we want to do, bring whoever we can into the mix. And if people somehow want to listen to that, okay. So I think it was more so based off the fact that it's always been like, even from the start, it was a group of friends that started it, and just guys that want to just enjoy hanging out, having fun. And that's where it's gone and continued to be.
Well, I have to say, you know, your guys's portion of the show, which I'll call phase 2 of the show, that is what I appreciated the most. It was silly and goofy, and the laughter was genuine between you two. And I think it really dialed it up for the show. And it's something that, you know, I, along with Carl, have tried to keep going to in the post Joel Fourth Line podcast, was like, if it starts to get too serious, it's like, how can we dial this back and tackle it from a fun perspective? So that was my favorite part.
I will say that you left at the exact right time, Joel, because you left and then we've had 3 seasons of COVID related hockey, and you got to avoid all of the toughest seasons of this show. So you made the right call.
I am legitimately impressed that you guys lasted through all of that. And then very much appreciate the fact that you're just like, Avalanche won, I'm out. Forget this. I don't want to have another season where I talk about the Avalanche not winning. Just, I'm out.
Everyone's lucky that we're all here talking right now, because when they won the cup that night, Carl texted me. He's like, I think the show's just over now. Like, I don't think we should record anymore.
Yeah, that was almost the end. We just pulled the plug immediately. I would have needed at least one victory lap, just all Avs, and then we stop.
And then that's the end. No, we had to see it through. We had to do our finale.
Well, I'm very thankful that we could have you back on here, Joel, for our last episode. Do you have any last thoughts, feelings, grievances for us, for anyone?
No, just the one grievance. So no, just good for you guys. Congrats. Just glad that I could come back, be a part of just the little Fourth Line podcast. And a little bit of the Blank Line podcast. Are we allowed to say that name anymore? Like, since it's over.
And what are they? I think we can still say. What are they going to do? Come after us?
You don't exist anymore.
Exactly.
So what are you? So like, you guys are heading off into the sunset. What's next?
Everyone keeps asking us this question, and the answer is kind of nothing. Like, relax, enjoy our Monday nights. I'm sure, I'm not going to speak for Carl. I'm sure I'll get back into this, creative territory at some point, but for right now, it's just a bit of a break.
Do you think you'll do like something in hockey, or if you could be on any type of podcast, what would you be?
If I was going to dive back into podcasting, I would take a break from the hockey a little bit. I'd do something more fun. Honestly, I'm always in awe of people who are just like, let's just get around a table and have a conversation and see if people like what we'd say. So I don't know, random topics, something like that.
You would break one, because you're going to say conspiracy theories?
Yeah, conspiracy theories. You got
sure.
Way to go, man.
Absolutely. You're probably right, actually.
Do you have, what's your number one conspiracy? I think we've talked about this on the show before, but there's been a lot of episodes.
I think we did a Fifth Line, like, sports conspiracies, and it's like, my favorite is still the Michael Jordan suspension. That wasn't a suspension when he went and played. It's like when he went and played baseball, but everyone knows that it was his gambling, and they were like, you got to go. but we're not going to suspend our most popular. Like 100%, that's what happened. I mean, I don't even think that's a conspiracy. It's just fact. It's just we all acknowledge it.
Well, unless those parties acknowledge it, then it's a conspiracy.
There you go.
I actually watched. Did you know that there's a 30 for 30 on Disney Plus on that? I don't know if you've ever watched it, but I recently pulled it up, watched it. It's pretty good. But what was wild to me is that through the entire thing, they never mention his gambling. It's just on his baseball career, and they frame it through the lens that he used at the time of like his dad passed away and he needed a change, and that was it. They never once brought up the fact that it was possibly because of a gambling suspension.
It's 100% because of the gambling.
Don't believe you.
Yeah, 100% against so. Well, now that sounds good. I was like, that's always the question. I was like, because when I left, like I've not gotten back into anything. It's like I was curious to know if it was going to be like athletes. Athletes always talk about how difficult it is to get back, like when they retire from football, hockey, whatever. They're like they don't know what to do with themselves. So it's like, so now you guys are going to have to come to Joel's counseling couch, and I'll work with you guys through the end of the show about what's next.
There it is. There's the next podcast. It's just called Joel's Counseling Couch.
Yeah, I think we'll need that. It'll be weird come Mondays in the fall for sure. Yeah. So we'll just call you up.
Joel's totally regretting coming on now. He's like, I just got wrapped into another podcast.
I don't know. We'll see. You just leave. I'll just call my phone. I'll go to voicemail. You guys just leave. I'll just talk for like an hour. I'll listen maybe.
We'll just send you the podcast files. We'll never upload them. We'll just make a podcast of us talking about our problems and just send you the file. It'll be great. Well, it's been great having you on the show all these years, Joel. I appreciate you coming back. I appreciate all that you did. And I guess we'll see you never on the show. Never, ever again. We will never have you back on.
Thanks, boys. Can I drop one last?
Yes, absolutely.
Boom City.
So good talking to Joel again. Took me back to my early days on the podcast.
Yeah, because you joined, I think I told you, I went back and double checked, and I think it was 205 was your first episode as a official co-host. You did guest spots with me and Joel. You did guest spots with just me, filling in for Joel. So you were certainly not a stranger to the show before you joined, but what was that? 184 episodes ago, you joined the show and were a part of the three of us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wild to think about. Those were fun shows when it was the three of us. Cause I remember the prep was like Carl sending a bunch of topics through, and then we'd get on and Joel would log on to the video and Carl would be like, so you good with all the topics? And Joel's like, yeah, let's just go. And we just started like that. Like there's no small talk, no like, how's the weekend? Joel was just all business. Let's get it going. Yeah.
Yeah. And it kind of grew. And I think I don't think we mentioned it in the interview, but me and Joel always knew that the show was better with another voice added to it. And it was fun with what we created. I mean, listening back this past week to some clips and some segments, certainly, the show continued to evolve and change, and it was just fun to be a part of each of those. It feels like its own entity that is entirely out of my control, even though it kind of is.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to Dave and Gary for dropping by. Thank you to Joel for coming back. It was a great, great visit to memory lane.
And thanks to what they brought to the show for sure over all these years, and their continued support after they left. All three of them, were a part, even though they weren't showing up on Mondays, Sundays, whenever we recorded. They were a part of making the show work, and it was just great. So one last time ever, let's take a break, and we'll be back on the other side with more of our final episode. 3, 2, 1.
That was a good break. Our last one ever.
Yeah, we got some snacks. We got ice cream sandwiches in the back of the recording studio today.
Yeah. Thanks to the intern for running to pick those up at lunchtime today.
The intern does a great job.
So one of the segments that we have done, I think, multiple times over the years, and I always laugh when I think about this, because this last year we did a best and worst segment throughout the season. Like, what was the best thing that we thought that happened this week and what was the worst? And when we first started talking about doing it this year, we were like, yeah, this is a great idea. And then we did it and we're like, didn't we do this before? I'm pretty sure we had done it in previous seasons.
I think we did, but we didn't name it the same way we did this year.
No,
we gave it a new name.
New name this year. Because the very first week that we did it, our best was Connor McDavid, because he was doing Connor McDavid things. And our worst was the Arizona Coyotes, because they're the Arizona Coyotes. And then the next week that we did it, our best was Connor McDavid, because he did Connor McDavid things. And our worst was the Arizona Coyotes, because he did Coyotes things.
Didn't we switch? Because there was one, Connor McDavid remember that one week this year that Connor McDavid was all whiny in the media?
Yes.
So I think he was the worst for one day this year.
And the Coyotes were the best for some reason.
I forget why, but
me too.
They did something successful.
So our segment was called the Connor and the Coyotes.
Yeah, but it had other variations. I mean, we've called it best and worst, but even before you joined, when me and Joel did it, we did the sliding scale of Andrew Raycroft to Patrick Waugh. Do you remember that scale of how good something was? And that was, me and Joel were talking after our chat there this week, and thinking of all of the random segments we've come up with is really a highlight of the show. So we wanted to do a best and worst of the podcast. What is our best moments, best memories of the podcast? And what is our worst memory of the podcast? What is our worst moment of the show?
You want to know my worst moment?
I do.
Having to write a positive article about Claude Lemieux.
Were you actually on the show at that point, or were you frequent guest host at that point?
I think I was more of a guest host at that point, because I was at the Wings Nation back then. So the agreement was you'd have to post on my site or I posted on yours.
That's right.
I think that's what happened.
That sounds about right. Yeah, that was a good article. You did it. I mean, shout out to you though, because you did a great job writing a positive article about Claude Lemieux.
Yeah, someone you probably couldn't even write a positive article about.
It would have looked very similar to what you did. Very similar. I would have talked in Darren McCarty's, because that's what I would have had to do. I would have had to do Darren McCarty's. I would have talked a lot about his wrestling career, his music career. Like he's multi-talented. He can do all kinds of things. Hockey was never going to be the only thing for him.
No, but it was the best thing. Let's be honest.
I haven't actually seen his wrestling because I choose not to pay to watch his. What was it called that he was participating in?
I couldn't tell you. It was ridiculous. The whole thing was ridiculous.
Psycho death match or something like that.
It was something like that. Yeah. Anyways, was insane.
That's a good worst. That's a very good worst. When I think of my worsts for the podcast, I think of just like those moments of trying to figure out what to do in the middle of the summer. That's probably my worst. There's just those days of that debate of like, what are we going to talk about today? And there were some times, actually, that's not true. I have a new worst. I very much have a new worst. But for the episodes, that was it, right? Of just like, what do we do? Which is why we started doing like a themed series, right?
It made the off seasons much easier for us.
So much nicer, right? What have we done? We did the top 10 list.
We did the top 10s. Yeah. We did a hockey history off season.
That was a fun one.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I had some good guests that time.
But the actual worst for me, and I've talked about this with several people in the past, and actually talked about it with Dave after mentioning, because when we first started the show, my job was just, I sat down and I talked and I like helped put together a list, but Dave did all the editing and the posting. And then he left the show and I did all the editing and the posting. And it's by far the worst part.
Yeah, it is.
Luckily, these last few years with like switching to Zoom has been great. Were you ever on the show when we still did Skype, or did you join? That was a nightmare.
Yeah, I remember Skype.
It was terrible. And trying to get everything to work, and then you'd have like low audio from one person for no reason, or you'd have like a hiccup in it and it would just like skips what they're saying. It was terrible. Zoom, I get why people started Zooming during COVID and not Skyping.
Yeah, I remember when you first discovered Zoom and we started testing it and using it, it was a world of difference.
And this was pre-COVID. Like we were on Zoom before it was a thing. And because another podcaster had suggested it. And so it saved me a lot of time. I had way less headaches. During the Skype era, it would take me hour, sometimes hour and a half to like salvage audio. Doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. I don't know if people realize how much work goes into it, but Carl edits every single episode. He records and edits them all. It's like, I commend you for that, Carl, because that is a huge dedication. It's a huge amount of work. I have groups of friends who will be like, hey, we're thinking of starting a podcast. Do you want to be on it? And I'm always like, I will show up to talk. I want nothing to do with the editing.
And that was actually during the contract negotiations with you. That was the exact thing you told me.
Yeah, exactly. Write the editing out of my contract.
But it is one thing that's tough. And I earlier last year was at the Alberta Podcast Conference Festival.
Yeah.
And joined them. And a lot of them were quite surprised doing a weekly show that we release it the same day we record. And I think part of what makes, we joke about the fact that we don't do edits. We don't do any of these things. It's literally because like, we don't have time to turn around and do, even before, there was a time we were dropping 2 episodes a week. I didn't have time to like do other things and also edit for as much time. I think the classic edit is that you spend as much, like 1 to 2 times the length of the audio editing it and then posting it and then promoting it. And it's for an hour-long episode, you're spending 3, 4, 5 hours after you've recorded. So we just don't have that time. And so to be able to turn it around, typically we stop recording and it's posted within an hour, hour and a half, which is a lot of that time is just computers thinking and working, and I'm doing something else. So it works.
Yeah. Well, and you've never complained about it either. So that's the last thing I'll say. Also, this is why Carl gets so mad at me when I swear.
Don't have time for it, Nick.
More editing.
Yeah. It's not that we're trying to, we are trying to keep it pretty wholesome and and PG, family friendly, but also I don't have to edit it.
No.
Yeah. Do you have a best?
I do. I feel like it's the obvious best, though. What's your best? You want to say it at the same? Should we count down and say it at the same time?
Sure. Let's see if it works. 3, 2, 1. The friends we made along the way.
Go ahead. What were you going to say before I interrupted you?
I was just going to say the people we've met. You are someone we met through the podcast. You were a person actually here. Do you know what? I still have it right here.
Oh boy, what do you have? He's leaving his computer right now. This is terrifying. Oh yeah.
Before, and maybe this was you bribing me to get on the podcast, but whatever it is, whatever it was, I have a. Can I say? Should we do some product placement here?
I work for them, so it's fine.
Okay, so I have a lovely bottle of Weiser's rye whiskey, engraved with Fourth Line Podcast on it.
Yeah,
and that was the thing. Nick wasn't. You were just someone who listened to the show, who thought that was nice, and he wanted to send us something nice.
Yeah.
And so just those kinds of things. A listener, Scotty, who makes our jingle maker, he sent me recently an empty, now granted he did eat it first, but an empty carton package of the Nathan McKinnon cereal that they sell in Denver area. So I've got that at my house. Just like things like these are people that we met who just are the kindest, nicest people. And sure, we've met some people along the way who've disappeared, who have, differing thoughts on internet kindness to strangers. We have met fantastic people. And that's honestly what keeps us going. We wouldn't do this final episode. We would just end it. We wouldn't care. We'd just be like, yeah, all right, we're done. See you later. But as much of this episode is for the people out there as it is for us.
And people all around the world too, right? It's so cool. This is one of the, the last few years, as frustrating as the internet has become because of the discourse around like literally every tiny little thing, like it gave us this community. Like you said, I'm here because we met over the internet. You built a writer's room for the website of people you met through the internet. And we all became friends. It's just super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. These are people that I, like you said, they're not just like, they're not people I know. Like these are friends who I would go out of my way to do something for, who have gone out of our way to do things for. And it's fantastic.
Yeah.
You said Royal Rumble was your best.
I said Royal Rumble. Yeah. So I really think Royal Rumble was the best segment that this show did, bar none. I really do. And, we talked about it in the interview with Joel. He actually pointed out it was a turning point for the show, and it turned it in a really good direction.
It did. It kind of, it gave us it's not like we needed the right or the authority to do what we wanted, but we knew, because we saw the reaction of everyone else when it was happening, we knew that we had people had our backs. They liked what we were doing, and we could just continue the nonsense.
Yeah. Well, and again, I said it to you and Joel, like that's what drew me into your guys' portion of the show. The fun, that was fun. That was fun content. It was silly. It was goofy. You couldn't get it anywhere else. There's a lot of people who took themselves very seriously at those points in the history of podcasting. But could we take, we did a little flashback earlier. Could we take a little flashback? I didn't actually tell you that I was going to do this, and I didn't really think it through, but since you mentioned it, it seems fitting that we listen back. So not to the Royal Rumble episode, but I listened to both the Royal Rumble episode and the episode after that. The episode after that, I think, is one of my favorite. The Royal Rumble episode itself, but after that was a special moment. All right.
Welcome to the Fourth Line Podcast in partnership with Last Word on Sports. This is August the 7th, 2016. With you today is myself, Carl, and what happened there? Hello? What's going on?
You can't see me. You can't see me.
Oh, welcome to this week's show.
My time is up. The time is
so good.
Amazing.
The fact that that's what that gave us was even just that intro. It was all worth it.
Oh man, that is so good. I forgot about that. You just surprised me with that right now.
Yeah.
I forgot that happened. That's hilarious.
So just all of that, right? And it did. It brought us to, as we mentioned there, right? Brought us to Last Word on Sports, met a bunch of great people there. And then, left Last Word on Sports, went to Alberta Podcast Network, which was fantastic, right? Brought us into the world of sponsorships and all of that. And then ending at Full Press Radio right now, and just kind of that trajectory of where we've been on, and the people we've met and the connections we've made, and just all of that is so nice. So, which brings me then 2. The Royal Rumble. Do you remember back? So this was the summer. It was actually the summer of 2016 is how long ago this was. So 6 years ago, we sat down and did the Royal Rumble. And if you're thinking it felt like yesterday, it might be there. Do you remember who in 2016 was the captain of the Detroit Red Wings?
Yeah, there haven't been many of them. It would have to be Henrik Zetterberg.
Because they went Zetterberg and then captainless after him, right? Until Larkin.
Yeah.
So it was him. The Avalanche, it was the 4th season of Gabe Landeskog as captain at that point in time.
Man, he's been around for a long time, hey?
I mean, I know that if you had have asked me, I would have known, but I kind of forgot the fact that he's been captain since he was 19 of that team.
It's crazy.
Really, really well done job by him. But I mean, when I look at the list of people who were in that Royal Rumble, and the Royal Rumble, if you don't know, is where they just pit 30 wrestlers against each other, and one of them comes out on top. So we did the same with NHL captains. And so looking back at it, this list is not as different 6 years later as I thought it would be. There are some standout changes, right? Some guys no longer in the league. Shane Doan, Brian Giunta. Who do you think Brian Giunta was the captain of at that point in time?
The Montreal Canadiens?
It was the Buffalo Sabres.
What? Was he like 42 at that time?
He was 37. Ooh. What country is Brian Giunta from?
America.
He
USA.
is America.
Yeah,
he is.
I knew that one.
Giordano, Eric Stahl, Jonathan Taves, Columbus. Who do you think was there?
Oh, baby, Nick Foligno.
You knew it.
Love him.
On the other side, though, who's the captain of the Dallas Stars?
What year is this? 2016?
Mm-hmm. You're not going to like the answer.
Or probably so. It was Jamie Benn. Hey,
it was Jamie Benn. Yeah. Some other guys no longer in the league: Willie Mitchell, Mikko Koivu, Shea Weber, Andy Green, David Backes, Dion Phaneuf. Which Sedin was it? I mean, we've talked about the Snides tour. Which Sedin was the captain?
Henrik.
It was Henrik. Ovi was the captain of the Capitals. And most importantly, who was the captain of the Winnipeg Jets?
This one I cheated a little bit. Why don't you tell us who the captain of the Winnipeg Jets was, Carl?
It was none other than Andrew Ladd. One of the many players that have been a recurring joke trend on this show. We've had Andrew Ladd as a running bit.
Mm-hmm.
I was reminded that it didn't happen. There was a long while. I made an impassioned plea. And again, we've had so many different things. I was reminded by Joel that I made a very impassioned plea. Maybe you remember this, and maybe listeners do, that Ryan Kessler's contract was the most likely to be bought out contract that had ever been signed in the history of contracts. And turns out that contract's wrapped up and he didn't. So Joel, all these years later, it was like, hey, remember the fact that you were wrong about Ryan Kessler? I was like, black that one out.
Joel would remember that.
he did. So he was there. But thinking back, so the winner, we've listed all of these. Okay. Do you remember who the original winner of the Royal Rumble was?
I actually don't.
It was Ryan McDonough, captain of the New York Rangers at the time. Nashville Predator extraordinaire, Ryan McDonough.
That one, like every time that I remember he was a captain of the Rangers, it's like I'm blown away because it feels like he's had an entire career as a Tampa Bay Lightning defenseman.
It does, but it also feels like he had an entire career as a Ranger. Like it's two different players who like grew up and retired and then went to a different team. And but when I look at this, right, because there's always like I look at it, this list, and like Chara stands out, right, as the guy who you would key on. So if I think back then, I would assume that he would get picked on and thrown out pretty quickly. Would you agree?
Chara?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He'd have like three captains grabbing his legs and like trying to force him over the ropes.
Which is, I mean, And he's for a Boston Bruin, he's a very nice guy.
Yes. Yeah, he is.
So I think, he would kind of just take it. Be like, okay, sorry guys, I'll leave now.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go. I'm tired anyways.
Who would be your pick if you had to look at this with what we know? Who would be your pick for Royal Rumble winner all these years later?
Oh man. Probably, who I like as a winner for this contest is Claude Giroux. I think he's scrappy enough.
That could work.
He's the kind of guy who like deliver low blows and like take illegal weapons out from like under the ring and stuff to steal the victory.
I think all these years later, I look at Dion Phaneuf and think like he would do what it takes to win this as well.
No.
You don't think so?
Absolutely not. What about Dion Phaneuf makes you think that he would do whatever it takes to win?
Okay. Very good point. Very good point. But I mean, it's not a hockey skill competition. It's being a donkey on the ice. So he was pretty good at that.
Okay. When you describe him as being a donkey on the ice, yeah, I guess he'll do whatever it takes.
So that would be mine. You know what? I'm sure somewhere that there is a video of that Claude Giroux versus Dion Phaneuf. We'll see it. We'll see here if there is one of those.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
So we've had those, right? We've had all of those. We talked about, the counseling coach. The very first repeated segment we had was the kangaroo court.
Oh yeah, I remember
that was one, and that's like a baseball throwback of that. And so just all of these segments in Elimination Station. It's been fun.
Other one coming up. Rant Shack.
The ranch. We've had some good rants in our days.
You know what one stands out that I remember the most is when the Blue Jays were in the playoffs. You were very mad about bandwagoners.
Yes. Uh-huh.
You had a very good rant about the bandwagon.
Yeah, I think that I've changed my tune over the years. I'm more okay with the bandwagoners now. It feels I'm like, it feels kind of gatekeepy for me to be against bandwagoners.
Yeah, that's okay. You're allowed to change over time, evolve, better yourself.
I feel like we should. Yeah. We got some let's move on here. We got some messages from some folks this week. Some longtime friends of the show had some words that they wanted to send us. Let's start with one who, while not a big part of the on the show part of it, but a huge, completely underrated part of the podcast operating is Mike Laybourne. He is a fellow Detroit Red Wings fan.
Yeah.
I don't know why I surround myself with this kind of people, but I do.
We're good people.
You are actually. Because he mentions another one, right? Gwen, one of the first people that we met as a writer on the show, right? She's also a Red Wings fan. But she and him, he wrote a piece this week kind of touching on that. And I want to share some of his thoughts. He said, in 2015, the show was part of a website that shall not be named. And I was writing for Fansided alongside Alex, whom I met a little earlier when he was late for a wedding or something. The podcast had been out for some years already, hosted by Carl and some other guys whose names I forget, but still give deserved credit. Sorry, Dave and Gary. Anyway, the legend that is Gwen was my editor and invited Carl, myself, and some others to a round table where we could talk about Carl's favorite subject, the Detroit Red Wings. And I very much remember this. This is the first thing that I was ever invited to do as through the podcast. I believe it was like, I forget what it was, but I had to pick something for the Red Wings, and I did it with all the snark necessary for me to do it. That's when I discovered not just the podcast, but podcasts in general. Before that, I've been listening exclusively to radio like a chump. Who knew that such honest and genuinely funny hockey content was available on demand like this? Everyone except me, it seems. But the podcast was casted each week. Carl and Joel kept us updated with what was going on in the world of the NHL and the world of Austin Matthews, respectively. Even through the summer months when there was no hockey, the team were there every Tuesday morning. It was clear that these are my kind of people when I tweeted the show asking for a mini stick to protect myself from giant moths, and one was sent. And that was I remember that. We had a thing where when we first got the mini sticks for high sticking, we said, like, tell us why we should give you one. Best reason gets one. And Mike said that there were giant moths attacking England and he needed one. And that seems like the best way to do it. And as he says, in that sense, I owe Carl my life. He says more, if you want to read it, head to thefourthlinepodcast.com where you can read more stuff because that's not going away. All of our episodes are still going to be up there. The show's going to be there, so it's going to be great. You can tune in over there, and the writers are still going to be doing stuff. So that great community is still going to be there, even with us ending. But that's such kind words from Mike.
Yeah. I actually remember that Big Moth story as well, as just like a fan of the show and a listener. But yeah, we love Mike at this show. We appreciate how much he does for the show. It's not always obvious, but it's very obvious to us.
Yes. So thank you, Mike. And thank you to all the other writers, right? Brody and Alex and Joe and Ben and everyone who's written for the show in the past. Gwen, I'm sure I'm forgetting someone's name, and for that I apologize. Nick, you wrote for the website once, as you mentioned.
Let's move on.
Someone else who wrote, Herman, he wrote, like I said, I would forget people. One person who I know has written for the website before is Matt. And he actually sent us a little piece of audio. So let's see what Matt has for us here.
Look at this photograph.
Oh, God.
Every time I do, it makes me laugh.
Bonjour, mes amis. This is Matt from, a number of different podcasts. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to say how sad it is that you're wrapping up what has been the best hockey show on the planet. Really appreciate all the stuff that you guys have brought us over the years, and I don't know what I'm going to do without it. And while I wasn't there from episode 1, I think I was there from episode 5, maybe? So pretty close to the beginning. And I do appreciate all the years of high sticking and those smelly pucks and the mini sticks and all the great stuff you've brought us, all the stories you've told. I mean, at this point, I'm left with all my Islander podcasts, and I don't know how many times we can talk about how Lou is asleep at the switch and not getting us a scoring winger. By the way, Carl, your listeners should know that we recently had you on Our Liner Notes, an appearance that you have yet to promote on this show. And I made a pretty solid effort, if I say so myself, to laud praise on your show. Least you could do is share that with folks. Without further ado, il est pour nous de conclure un autre spectacle de à 4 lignes. That's terrible. Au revoir, Carl and Nick.
Wow.
Can you tell me what did he just say?
Wow.
Do I need to edit that?
You know what I can tell you, Carl? His French is better than yours.
Yeah, I set the bar pretty low, so you're welcome for that, Matt.
There are no edits required to that. That was a very nice message. Thank you very much, Matt. And Carl, for the love of God, promote his podcast.
What did he say though? I genuinely have no idea what he said.
He didn't say it in French.
Yes, he did. What was the French words?
Oh, the French words. He basically, I don't remember it word for word, but he basically said, farewell to the Fourth Line podcast. Thank you for everything. Something like that. I have to listen to it again.
Well, he did a great job. Shout out to you. Your French, your Portland French is better than my Canadian French. So,
that was great, Matt.
I could have sworn that I'd mentioned it on this show, but it is a great time because what we did is they do a music show and they do themes. And so they said, with the Fourth Line ending, we want you to come on and you can pick whatever you want, but we want to talk, we want to kind of do it around your show. So we did the best last albums of anyone. And so we did, it was a lot of fun. We did, I brought the last album from the White Stripes, Icky Thump. We had Matt and Chris, they brought Amy Winehouse and trying to remember, Nirvana.
Yeah, of course. But actually, all three of those are, I can't believe Icky Thump was the White Stripes' last album.
Yeah, I couldn't either when looking
crazy.
through it. That's why I had to bring it. But it was a lot of fun. So we talked about music and those albums and kind of picked some songs and listened to them. And then Also talked about the history of the show and kind of some of our memories about it. So when you finish listening to this, I actually think it's 2 parts. So this is going to, like, I don't even know how long we've been going.
I don't know.
This is going to be
too much fun.
This is going to be close to 2 hours by the time we're done with it. We did close to 2 hours with their show, but they split into 2 parts. So head on over there and check that out. Our liner notes, OUR liner notes. So it's a lot of fun. Thank you to them for having me on. Sorry for not promoting it enough, but that's what you get. I apologize, but it's a lot of fun. They're great guys. I've been on their show before. All of their versions of shows, like he said, he does a lot of them. I've never been on a Star Wars show, but that's probably for the best.
Probably.
We got another question. Someone's asked us, tell me 3 Canucks players you've enjoyed watching in the time that we've been a podcast and why. So these last 8 years, who are some of your favorite Canucks?
Like Vancouver Canucks?
Yeah.
You know who I really like more recently is Elias Pettersson. I remember one time they were playing against Detroit, and this dude was streaking down the ice, and he looked up to see how much time he had left, and he never skipped a beat, and he just kept going. And he scored on that play too, by the way. So he's one for me.
I want him to get back to what he was before because he was so good. This season was a down year. He's so fun to watch.
Yeah, so impressive.
I think it's easy to say the Sedins. I mean, we literally named this last season in their honor.
Of course.
Right? So if I was genuinely to say like the most fun would be the Sedins and them. The problem is though, I also want Roberto Luongo in there. So I'm going to combine the Sedins into one person because every Twin loves when you do that, when you treat them as one person.
That's basically what they did for their whole hockey career.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm going to put Roberto Luongo in as my 3rd.
Yeah. He's a fun one for sure.
The fact that he had his bathroom trip delay it was a playoff game, was it not?
I don't know if it was a playoff game. I don't remember that part, but it's very possible.
Nonetheless, the fact that he made that a joke as his profile picture on Twitter for years is all that I need to know about Roberto Luongo.
It's amazing.
Last question we got came in from Brody, and he wants to know, as we're wrapping up the show, he wants to know about us, right? Joel mentioned the counseling couch. Is he going to have us there? Brody wants to know, are we still going to get together to watch Red Wings Avs tribute videos together?
Not any more tribute videos. I've had enough of that. Plus, Carl doesn't like editing our audio, so no more tribute videos. But I would love to get together and watch some games.
Absolutely. I mean, much like everyone with the show, but especially Nick. I mean, I'm going to force my way to, still celebrate the Red Wings with Nick in the same way that you suffered through the Avalanche winning a Stanley Cup this year. So in 3 years, when the Red Wings win a Stanley Cup, I'll be right alongside you.
I love your optimism.
Why not? Right?
I mean, they're going to make the playoffs this year, so.
That's right. That's it, Nick. Do you have any lasting thoughts as we wrap up? That's it. That's all we wrote down on our show prep.
Oh man, I have a lot of thoughts. And I'm going to try not be too repetitive because I know that we've said a lot over the last, 2 hours now. When you guys started this podcast, it was eye-opening for me that just regular people could talk about stuff that they love. And it was part of the reason, it was part of the inspiration for me to go into, the hockey community, online community of blogging and stuff. And then the fact that I got to come on and be on the show as a guest was very exciting for me. And then the fact that you asked me to come on was even more exciting for me. And it's been, for me, an amazing run. And the show has given me a lot. Like it's given me a voice for my hockey takes, which wasn't really lacking before. But, in other ways of life too, it's given me the confidence to speak publicly, for example. It's made me comfortable, talking about things that are outside of my comfort zone. So the show's given me a lot. I really appreciate everyone who's listened and who's hung out with us and talked with us and corrected us over the years. Thank you so much for your engagement.
There's a lot of the correcting that happens.
There's a lot of the correcting that happens. Yes. And then that brings me to you, Carl, because there's been one constant from the start of this thing to now, and that's you. And I think that you're the heartbeat of the show. So thank you for being there at the beginning. Thank you for keeping it going. And thank you for including me.
The least I could do. We always, like we said, we do this to have fun. And I love the fact that there are people who engage with it and care and also have fun. That's why we did it all along. That's why we still do it. That's why to this day, this podcast exists. That's why we put in an effort and actually did show prep today. Because you deserve at least one episode a year where we try.
Yes.
And that's really it. I mean, we've met fantastic people, some people who I've never thought would ever come on, who would ever want to talk to me about hockey and like actually value my opinion. People who, I look up to and respect, even from the very beginning. I mean, we talked about the state of podcasting at the beginning, but a little behind the scenes, I might have mentioned it on one podcast at some point in time. But the very first way, the reason a lot of how we did our show at the very beginning, behind the scenes, the editing, the hosting, all of that was modeled entirely off of how the Dango guys did their show at the beginning.
Right.
Because we reached out to them. We were like, we want to start a podcast. How do we do it? What do we need to do? And I think it was Adam Wild got back to us and told us what they do and made it easier for us. And so that's why throughout the time, I mean, we've helped people sort out their podcasts because people have done that for us, and it just becomes a thing. Right. And so from the very beginning with them, there's only one person we've ever asked who has not come on the show. Actually, there's one person. I said to Joel, it never hurts to ask. Greg Wyszynski is the only person who we've ever asked who has not come on the show, who actually said, I will come on your show, but right now I'm very busy. Get back to me later. And then just
ghosted.
Clearly just an excuse. Ghosted us later. So I no longer listen to ESPN. I don't watch hockey on ESPN just because of him. Actually, that was during his Yahoo days. Maybe ESPN wishes different. Who knows? But that's it, right? I mean, just all the things, all the people we've met, the things that we've done, the fun that we've had. It'll be weird not doing this. In the summer, it'll be normal, I think.
Yeah.
It'll be very strange. There will be a missing spot come puck drop in October.
Agreed.
On Monday nights. So thank you all for being here along the way. You can still go to the fourthlinepodcast.com. We're still on Twitter at Fourth Line Podcast. Nick is Nick Sagan 19.
Yeah.
Nick Sagan 19. So head on over there. We're both there. We're not going anywhere from there. It's not like we're disappearing and like moving to
we'll be around.
Discover ourselves in a foreign land.
Yeah, we'll be around.
So reach out, let us know. I mean, if you got questions, you got thoughts, we'll try to still be active on those. A little different than it is now, but yeah. So head on to those, thefourthlinepodcast.com for everything you need. You don't have to subscribe anymore. You can unsubscribe if you want to. Actually, maybe stay subscribed, because what if this is 389? Do we know what Jamie Benn is at right now?
We have to do one final check, don't we?
We probably should.
All right, here we go. I got him. He's at 329. Oh man.
So we got a 60-point lead on Jamie Benn. Let's hope that it doesn't happen, but we might need to. I mean, by the time Jamie Benn scores his 61st more goal, we might have to bring this back. So maybe stay subscribed. If this is your first time listening, it's a weird time to start, but thank you. Nick, one last time.
Yeah. So those of you who listen right to the end, first of all, why? Second of all, thank you. As you know, I've been ending every show with a song that I make up on the spot. Well, today I'm not making up a song on the spot, but this song has been in the works for a very long time. So we're going to send you off with our finale song that is titled The Finale, parentheses, the Jamie Benn song. This isn't goodbye, this is see you on Twitter, where the laughs aren't as loud, but the thoughts are much quicker. Every beginning's come to an end. At least we'll always be ahead of Jamie. It's the fourth line at the end of our career. Grinded off our butts for the pleasure of your ears. It's the last shift, last lap around the mic. Now the skates feel dull when we hit the ice. Like the Sedines, we're taking our final bow, but instead of receiving gifts, we gave them out. SNIDEES, yes, we're the opposite of them, so
this
don't get it mixed.
Goodbye. This is see you on Twitter, where the laughs aren't as loud, but the thoughts are much quicker. Every beginning's come to an end. At least we'll always be ahead of Jamie Benn.
We're not always nice, we've seen some people pissed, like when Jarmo Kekalainen said cease and desist. Bro, your team sucks. You got nowhere else to go. You threw your dreams away when you dealt Foligno. I'm sorry, Columbus, your team is just fine. There were plenty other targets that we hit in our time. Like Bettman and Daly, they deserved a good kicking. And there was that time when we banned the Bruins from high sticking. From shacks and couches to worst and best. We mispronounced names and put our geography to the test. We know you'll miss us, but we'll miss you more. Episode 389, the finale. No encore.
Goodbye. This is see you on Twitter, where the laughs aren't as loud, but the thoughts are much quicker. Every beginning's come to an end. At least we'll always be ahead of Jamie Benn. It's time for us to wrap up the final fourth line show. It's been a really good run and it's time for us to go. Every beginning must come to an end, and it's time for Carl to admit Sakic is no wiser man.
Should we end it there?
Yeah, that's a no. This isn't goodbye, this is see you on Twitter, where the laughs aren't as loud, but the thoughts are much quicker. Every beginning come to an end. At least we'll always be ahead of
This isn't
Jamie
goodbye,
Benn.
this is see you on Twitter, where the laughs aren't as loud, but the thoughts are much quicker. Every beginning's come to an end. At least we'll always be ahead of Jamie.
This isn't goodbye, this is see you on Twitter, where the laughs aren't as loud,
It's been a really good run and it's time for us to go.
Every beginning's come to an end.
At least we'll always be ahead of Jamie.